Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into a world where survival wasn't guaranteed. Where every choice, from what you ate for breakfast to whether you took a bath, could tip the scales between life and extinction. The medieval period, a time we romanticize with knights and castles and courtly love. But beneath those stone walls, humanity was playing a very dangerous game, and they didn't even know the rules. Tonight, we're exploring the bizarre ways medieval people almost wiped themselves out. Not through war, not through conquest, not through anything they saw coming, but through the ordinary, the everyday, the things they thought were keeping them safe. You're walking through a medieval village at dawn. The air smells like with smoke and damp earth. Around you, people are making choices, storing grain that glows faintly in the dark, avoiding water because everyone knows it makes you sick, trusting physicians who believe your personality lives in your blood, killing cats because a pope said they might be witches. Each decision makes perfect sense to them. Each one brings them closer to the edge. Historians estimate that the medieval population faced extinction-level threats at least a dozen times between 500 and 1500 CE. Not theoretical threats, real ones. Moments where the birth rate couldn't keep up with the death rate, where entire regions emptied out, where the thread of human continuity grew so thin you could almost see through it. And here's the strange part. Most of these near extinctions were self-inflicted. Medieval people were accidentally brilliant at almost ending themselves. They'd see a problem, apply logic that made sense within their worldview, and create something infinitely worse. It's darkly funny in a way, like watching someone try to put out a fire with oil, because oil is a liquid and liquids put out fires, right? Except the consequences were civilizations teetering on collapse. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I love knowing we're all scattered across the globe, but connected in these quiet hours. Some of you are in tomorrow already. Some of you are holding on to yesterday just a little longer. But we're all here now, together in this strange space where medieval peasants and modern insomniacs somehow meet. Now let me paint you a picture of what almost extinct really meant. Imagine a village of 200 people. Over the course of 5 years, 170 of them die. The remaining 30 are too old, too young, or too sick to maintain the farms. The fields go fallow. The next winter, 20 more die. Now you're down to 10. 10 people in a village built for 200. The buildings are still there. The church bell still rings because someone remembers they're supposed to ring it. But the knowledge is dying. The blacksmith is gone, so no one can repair tools. The midwife died in childbirth. Ironic and devastating. The millers will stop turning because no one remembers how to fix the gears. This happened, not in one village, in hundreds, across decades. Academic debates still rage about whether the medieval period should be called a near-extinction event or just a severe population bottleneck. Historians arguing over terminology while the numbers speak for themselves. Entire bloodlines ending. Entire skill sets vanishing. Languages disappearing because the last speakers died without passing them on. And the wildest part? Medieval people thought they were doing everything right. They had explanations for the suffering. God was angry. The stars were misaligned. Witches were cursing the wells. Jews were poisoning the bread. A horrific lie that led to massacres but never stopped the actual dying. They had answers, just not the right ones. Tonight, you're going to witness 10 different ways medieval humans nearly ended their own story. Some will make you laugh at the absurdity. Some will make you grateful for modern medicine, even with all its flaws. Some will feel uncomfortably familiar. Because here's the thing about human nature, we're still doing it. We're still making choices that seem logical within our framework, but might look insane to someone 1,000 years from now. We're still trusting authorities who are confidently wrong. We're still treating symptoms while making the disease worse. But that's a thought for another night. Right now, we're in the medieval world, where the plague is coming but hasn't arrived yet, where the grain in the storehouse is developing something strange, where the village cats are getting fewer, where pregnant women are being given remedies that will kill them, And no one knows. No one suspects. Everyone's just trying to survive until tomorrow. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in a medieval granary. The year is 1315. It's been raining for 2 years straight. Not the gentle rain that nourishes crops, the kind that drowns them, that turns fields into swamps and wheat into rotting mush before it can be harvested. The Great Famine has begun. But this isn't a story about starvation alone. This is about what people ate when they got desperate, and what was eating them from the inside. Look at the grain stores around you. Wooden bins filled with rye and wheat from seasons past. Precious reserves meant to carry villages through hard times. But something's wrong with this grain. If you look closely in the dim light, you'll see it. Small dark growths on the kernels. Purple-black extensions that look almost like tiny horns. The villagers see them too. They brush them off, grind the grain anyway. Because what choice do they have? Their children are hungry. Their neighbors are dying. A little mold never hurt anyone, right? Except this isn't just mold. This is ergot fungus, and it's about to make the famine infinitely worse. Ergot contains compounds similar to LSD. Medieval people didn't know this, obviously. They just knew that sometimes after eating the bread, strange things happened. Your fingers and toes start tingling, then burning, then going numb. Your limbs feel like they're on fire from the inside. You see things that aren't there. Demons dancing in the corner of your vision. The Virgin Mary weeping blood. Your neighbor's face melting like wax. Entire villages experiencing mass hallucinations. Everyone convinced they're being punished by God, or cursed by witches, or possessed by devils. The physical symptoms were even worse. Ergot poisoning causes vasoconstriction. Your blood vessels tighten and restrict. Blood flow to your extremities stops. Your fingers turn black. Your toes become gangrenous. Eventually, they just fall off. Medieval people called it holy fire or St. Anthony's fire because it felt like burning, and because they had no idea what caused it. They prayed to St. Anthony for relief. Built hospitals dedicated to him. Some people did feel better at these hospitals. Not because of divine intervention, but because the monks fed them different bread. Bread made from wheat stores that didn't have ergot. Nobody noticed the pattern. Academic historians still debate the full impact of ergotism on medieval population decline. Some argue it was a minor issue compared to actual starvation. Others suggest it killed tens of thousands and drove many more insane. The records are fragmentary because the people keeping records were often hallucinating. Imagine trying to maintain a monastery chronicle while your hands are numb and you're seeing angels that aren't there. Here's where it becomes an extinction-level threat. The Great Famine lasted from 1315 to 1322, 7 years. During that time, Europe lost between 10 and 25% of its population. But it wasn't just the deaths. It was the ripple effects. Ergot poisoning causes miscarriages. Women who ate contaminated bread couldn't carry pregnancies to term. Birth rates plummeted. The few children who were born often had developmental problems. Ergot compounds crossed the placental barrier. So you have a population already devastated by starvation. Now add mass poisoning that causes madness, gangrene, and reproductive failure. Now add the fact that this is happening right before the Black Death. The famine weakened everyone. The ergot poisoning made them vulnerable. And when the plague arrived in 1347, it found a population with compromised immune systems and depleted numbers. Some villages that survived the famine didn't survive the combination. The really tragic part? Ergot poisoning was completely preventable. The fungus only grows under specific conditions. Wet, cold weather during grain flowering. Exactly the conditions of the Great Famine. If medieval farmers had known to inspect their grain more carefully, if they'd understood that the dark growths were poison, if they'd had any framework for understanding fungal contamination, thousands of lives saved. But they didn't know, couldn't know. They were doing their best with the information they had, which was essentially none. There's something darkly poetic about it. Humanity nearly ended because they ate the very thing they stored to survive. The grain that should have saved them became the thing that poisoned them. And they kept eating it because the alternative was starvation. Choose between dying slowly of hunger or dying slowly of poison. Some choice. You're still in that granary. A woman enters carrying a basket. She scoops grain from the contaminated bin. Her hands are already showing the early signs. Slight tremor, discoloration on her fingertips. But she doesn't connect it to the grain. How could she? She fills her basket, takes it home, grinds it into flour, bakes it into bread, feeds it to her family, and the cycle continues. Tomorrow, her daughter will start seeing things. Her son's feet will begin to hurt. Her husband will become paranoid, convinced the neighbors are plotting against them. And somewhere in the village, someone will whisper about witchcraft. Because there has to be an explanation. There has to be a reason for the suffering. They just can't see it. It's invisible to them, hidden in the grain, waiting in the bread. Remember that contaminated grain. We'll come back to it later. Because ergot poisoning didn't end with a great famine. It kept appearing throughout the medieval period. Wherever conditions were right. Wherever people were desperate enough to eat anything. For now, just know this. The bread was poison, and everyone kept eating it. Because what else could they do? Strasbourg, 1518. A woman named Frau Trophia steps into the street and begins to dance. Not celebratory dancing. Not dancing with joy or purpose. Just dancing. Her feet moving in compulsive, rhythmic patterns. Hour after hour. She can't stop. Within a week, 34 others have joined her. By the end of the month, 400 people are dancing in the streets. Dancing until their feet bleed. Dancing until they collapse from exhaustion. Dancing until their hearts give out. Some of them die, still moving. This is the dancing plague of 1518, and it's just one of many that swept through medieval Europe. You're watching this happen, standing on a Strasbourg street corner in the summer heat. The dancers move past you, their faces blank, eyes unfocused, feet bleeding through worn shoes. Some are crying as they dance, begging for it to stop, but their bodies won't listen. The medieval authorities saw this and made a decision. A decision so perfectly, beautifully wrong, it almost defies belief. They decided the cure for too much dancing was more dancing. They hired musicians, built stages, opened guild halls. The logic seemed sound to them. These people clearly need to dance it out of their systems, like sweating out a fever. So give them space to dance properly. Give them music. Let them dance until they're cured. The musicians played. The dancers danced. More people joined them, and more people died. Historians still argue about what caused the dancing plagues. Mass psychogenic illness, basically mass hysteria. Ergot poisoning again. Remember that contaminated grain? Religious fervor taken to fatal extremes. Stress-induced trance states during times of famine and disease. Nobody knows for certain. The medieval chroniclers recorded it happening, but couldn't explain it. Physicians of the time blamed hot blood. They thought the dancers had an excess of sanguine humors. Too much heat in the bloodstream, causing involuntary movement. The treatment? Bloodletting, of course. Because when someone is dancing themselves to death from exhaustion, the obvious solution is to drain their blood. Some dancers were bled while they moved. Physicians chasing them with lancets, trying to open veins while people spun and leaped. It would be funny if it weren't so horrific. Here's why this almost caused extinction. Not directly. The dancing plagues themselves killed hundreds, not thousands. But they revealed something terrifying about medieval medicine. A complete and total lack of understanding about the human body. When faced with an unknown condition, medieval physicians would guess. And their guesses were often worse than doing nothing. The dancing plagues happened during periods of extreme stress. Famine, plague, war, times when populations were already at the breaking point. And when people developed stress-induced conditions, which we now understand happen, the medical response actively killed them. This pattern repeated across dozens of conditions. Seizures? Drill a hole in the skull to let the demons out. Fever? Drain blood to cool the humors. Infection? Apply dung poultices because folk wisdom says so. Pregnancy complications? More bloodletting plus arsenic. Each generation of physicians taught the next generation, passing down lethal protocols as established medical wisdom. Academic debates raged about the precise methodology. Should you drill the skull hole on the left or right side? How much blood should you drain from a pregnant woman? What's the optimal mixture of mercury, and lead for treating syphilis. They debated minutiae while the fundamental approach was killing people. Imagine you're a medieval person who falls ill. You have two choices: suffer alone and maybe recover naturally, or seek help from a physician who will almost certainly make things worse. Some people chose option one. They hid their illnesses, treated themselves with kitchen remedies, prayed and hoped. These people had better survival rates than those who sought professional medical care. Think about that. The medical establishment was so actively harmful that avoiding doctors improved your odds. But you couldn't always avoid them. If you were wealthy, physicians came to you. If you were poor and sick, you might be taken to a hospital, where the treatments would kill you faster than the disease. Back to the dancers. They're still moving through the streets. Some have been dancing for days now. Their clothes are soaked with sweat. Their skin is burning with fever from the exertion. Their feet leave bloody prints on the cobblestones. And the musicians keep playing. Because the authorities said to. Because the physicians recommended it. Because everyone agreed this was the right approach. One dancer, a man in his 30s, suddenly stops. Falls. His heart has given out. The other dancers step around him and continue. The musicians don't miss a beat. Because this is normal now. This is just what happens. People die and life continues and nobody understands why. There's a special kind of horror in watching people follow expert advice to their deaths. The authorities meant well. The physicians believed they were helping. The musicians thought they were providing therapy. Everyone was doing their best. And people kept dying. The dancing plagues eventually stopped. Not because anyone figured out how to cure them, but because they just ended. The way mysterious epidemics sometimes do. The survivors were left traumatized. The families of the dead were left confused. The physicians were left confident they'd done everything right. And somewhere, someplace else, another strange plague was beginning. Because medieval Europe was a petri dish of mysterious conditions. And medieval medicine was perfectly designed to make everything worse. You watch the last dancers finally collapse. Some are carried away by family members. Some lie where they fell until morning. The musicians pack up their instruments. The authorities congratulate themselves on handling the crisis. And in the back of your mind, a question forms. How did humanity survive this? How did we make it through centuries of well-intentioned harm? The answer is resilience and luck, and the fact that some people were smart enough to ignore the experts. But that luck was running thinner with each generation, because the next great threat was already stirring. And this one, the physicians would make so much worse. The year is 1233. Pope Gregory IX has just issued a papal bull, a formal decree from the highest authority in medieval Christendom. The document is called Vox in Roma, and it declares that cats, specifically black cats, are instruments of Satan. You're standing in a medieval village square, watching as men gather the cats. Barn cats that kept the grain stores free of mice. House cats that slept by the fire and caught rats in the kitchen. Strays that prowled the alleys, keeping vermin populations in check. All of them are suddenly enemies of God. The cats are thrown into sacks. The sacks are thrown into the river, or burned, or beaten to death with sticks, because the Pope said so. And when the Pope speaks, medieval Christians listen. The reasoning behind the decree made perfect sense within medieval logic. Witches were known to transform into cats. Demons often appeared as black cats. Cats were nocturnal, secretive, independent. Everything about them seemed suspicious. Plus, they had those unsettling eyes that glowed in the dark. Clearly, they must be in league with the devil. So the cats had to go, village by village, town by town. Across Europe, the cat population plummeted. Some regions killed every cat they could find. Cat ownership became suspect. If you kept a cat, you might be a witch. If you defended cats, you were probably in league with Satan. Better to prove your piety by killing them. The church didn't stop with the decree. Cat killing became ritualized. In some towns, throwing cats from bell towers became a festival event. Children watched as entertainment. The cats that survived went feral and fled to the forests. The domestic cat population of Europe nearly collapsed. And then the rats came. Not gradually, not slowly, but in waves. Without cats to control them, rat populations exploded. They infested grain stores, nested in thatched roofs, colonized every corner of every building. Rats in the pantry, rats in the bedroom, rats giving birth in your winter clothing. Medieval people noticed, of course, but they didn't connect the dots. They thought God was testing them with a plague of vermin. They prayed harder, killed more cats, made the problem worse. Academic historians still debate the exact timeline. Some argue the cat killing happened gradually over decades. Others suggest it was more concentrated in certain regions. But everyone agrees on the outcome. Fewer cats meant more rats, and more rats meant more fleas. And more fleas meant, well, you know what's coming. The Black Death arrived in 1347, carried by fleas that lived on rats. Rats that lived in cities and homes. Rats that had no natural predators anymore, because the predators had been systematically eliminated. The plague killed between 75 and 200 million people, roughly 30 to 60% of Europe's population. Some villages lost everyone. Complete extinction at the local level. The few survivors wandered into empty towns where doors hung open and meals sat rotting on tables. This is what extinction looks like up close. Not dramatic, not sudden, just absence. Streets that used to be crowded, now empty. Houses that used to ring with voices, now silent. And in the corners, in the walls, in the grain stores, rats. So many rats. Fat and thriving on abandoned food, breeding unchecked, carrying more fleas, more disease. The irony is almost unbearable. Medieval people thought they were fighting evil by killing cats. They believed they were protecting themselves from demonic forces. Every cat killed was a victory for righteousness. Every village cleared of felines was a village made pure. And every single one of those actions brought the plague closer. Here's what makes it an extinction-level threat. The Black Death didn't just kill people. It killed knowledge. Master craftsmen died without training apprentices. Physicians died, which might have been a blessing given their methods, but still. Farmers died during harvest season, leaving crops to rot. Entire professions vanished. Skills that took generations to develop disappeared in a single summer. The social fabric shredded. You couldn't trust your neighbor. They might be infected. You couldn't trust physicians. They were dying too. You couldn't trust priests. God clearly wasn't listening to their prayers. Some villages formed suicide pacts rather than wait for the plague. Others turned on each other, blaming anyone different. Jews were massacred in the thousands, accused of poisoning wells. Witches were burnt. Beggars were driven out. Anything to find a reason, a cause, an enemy you could actually fight. Because you can't fight rats. And you can't fight invisible fleas. And you certainly can't fight a bacteria you don't know exists. But you can fight the outsider, the different, the vulnerable. So they did. And the plague continued. And the rats multiplied. Back to the village square. The last cat has been killed. The villagers are satisfied. They've done their Christian duty, protected their souls, proven their faith. In a few years, the plague will arrive. 2/3 of them will die. The survivors will walk through streets carpeted with rat droppings. Still not understanding. Still not connecting. Still believing that cats were the enemy. Some regions did figure out. There are records of Italian cities that protected their cat populations. They noticed cats killed rats. They noticed fewer rats meant less disease. These cities had lower plague mortality rates. But they were the exception. Most of Europe had killed its cats and paid the price. The cat population eventually recovered, slowly, over centuries, as people forgot the Pope's decree, as new generations saw cats as useful again, as the association with witchcraft faded. But by then, the damage was done. The plague had already reshaped Europe, emptied regions, ended bloodlines, created a demographic crater that took 200 years to fill. All because someone decided cats were evil, and everyone believed him. You're walking away from the square now. The sun is setting. In the shadows between buildings, you see movement. A rat, then another, then a dozen more, scurrying through the streets that used to belong to cats, making themselves at home, getting comfortable, breeding, waiting. The plague is coming. The rats already know. They can sense it in their bones. in the fleas that bite them, in the bacteria multiplying in their bloodstreams. They're just waiting for the right ship to arrive, the right cargo, the right wind to carry inland. And when it comes, there will be nothing to stop it. Because the cats are gone, you're lying on a wooden table in a physician's chamber. The year is 1410. You have a fever. Nothing serious by modern standards. Maybe a mild infection. Perhaps influenza. Something your immune system could probably handle on its own. But you've made the mistake of seeking professional help. The physician enters. He's wearing long robes. Carries an air of absolute authority. He's studied at a university. Read Galen and Hippocrates. Memorized the 4 humors. He knows exactly what's wrong with you. Your blood is too hot. You have an excess of the sanguine humor. The treatment is obvious. Bloodletting. He'll drain about a pint of blood from your arm. Maybe more if the fever persists. This will cool your system. Balance your humors. Cure the fever. Except it won't. It will make you weaker. More vulnerable to infection. More likely to die. But the physician is confident. This is established medical practice, supported by centuries of tradition, taught in every medical school in Europe. So he opens your vein, and your chances of survival drop. Medieval medicine operated on principles that were completely, catastrophically wrong. The theory of humors dominated everything. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. For fluids that supposedly govern health and personality. Too much blood made you sanguine, cheerful but feverish. Too much phlegm made you phlegmatic, calm but sluggish. Too much yellow bile made you choleric, ambitious but angry. Too much black bile made you melancholic, creative but depressed. Every illness was an imbalance. Every treatment aimed to restore equilibrium. The problem? None of it was real. The humors don't exist. They're not actual fluids. They're not measurable. They're a theoretical framework with zero basis in anatomy or physiology. But medieval physicians believed in them completely and based every treatment on this fictional model. Bloodletting was the most common intervention. For everything. Fever? Drain blood. Headache? Drain blood. Stomach pain? Drain blood. Pregnancy complications? Drain even more blood. Physicians used special tools. Lancets for cutting veins. Scarificators, devices with multiple blades that made shallow cuts. Leeches for more controlled draining. They had whole protocols. Which vein to cut for which condition. How much blood to remove based on age and body type. The best time of day for bloodletting. Usually morning. It was a science. A precise, detailed, totally ineffective science. Academic historians debate the mortality rate of medieval bloodletting. Some estimate it killed 10% of patients directly. Others suggest it contributed to death in up to 40% of cases. The truth is we'll never know exactly, because medieval physicians didn't track outcomes. If a patient died after treatment, it meant the disease was too advanced, or God had other plans. Never that the treatment itself was lethal. But bloodletting wasn't the only problem. Medieval physicians also loved purging, making patients vomit or defecate to expel bad humors. They used emetics, substances that induce vomiting, and powerful laxatives, sometimes both at once. Imagine you have food poisoning. You're already dehydrated, already weak. The physician gives you something to make you vomit more, and something to give you severe diarrhea, to cleanse your system. You die of dehydration. The physician records that the poison was too strong, that your humors were too imbalanced to save. Never that he killed you by draining all your fluids. Then there were the medications. Mercury for syphilis, which doesn't cure syphilis, but does cause mercury poisoning. Patients would lose their teeth. Their hair would fall out. They'd develop tremors, go mad, die in agony. But hey, at least they didn't have syphilis anymore, because they were dead. Arsenic for various conditions. Lead for others. Antimony, another toxic metal. Medieval pharmacies were essentially poison shops, and physicians prescribed these substances with complete confidence. There's a famous case of King Charles II of England. He had a seizure in 1685. His physicians treated him with bloodletting multiple times, emetics to make him vomit, purgatives to make him defecate, enemas with antimony and herbs, plasters of pigeon dung on his feet, powdered human skull to drink, bezoar stone, a calcified mass from a goat's stomach. He died 4 days later. His physicians declared they'd done everything possible. Modern analysis suggests he probably had a kidney infection, something antibiotics could have cured. Instead, he was tortured to death by medical treatment. This wasn't unusual. This was standard care. For royalty, imagine what happened to peasants. You're back on that table. The physician has finished draining your blood. Now he's preparing a tonic. Ground beetle shells, powdered animal bone, something that might be arsenic. He mixes it in wine and tells you to drink. You do. Because he's the expert. Because he studied for years. Because everyone says physicians know best. The tonic tastes like metal and earth. Your stomach cramps immediately. The physician nods approvingly. The medicine is working, he says, purging the bad humors. By tomorrow, you'll be too weak to stand. By next week, if you survive, you'll have recovered. Not because of the treatment. In spite of it, your body fighting both the original illness and the physician's interventions. Here's why this almost caused extinction. Medieval childbirth. Women died in labor at staggering rates. About 1 in 3 women died from pregnancy-related causes over their lifetime. Physicians attended difficult births and made them worse. They'd bleed laboring women to ease the process. Give them ergot to speed contractions, the same poison from that contaminated grain. Use unsterilized instruments. Introduce infections with their unwashed hands. The maternal mortality rate in physician-attended births was actually higher than in births attended only by midwives, because midwives used common sense and experience, while physicians used theory and confidence. For a species to survive, you need births to exceed deaths. When 1/3 of women die from reproduction-related causes, you're in trouble. Add an infant mortality, about 30 to 40% of children died before age 5. Add in deaths from physician-treated illnesses. Add in deaths from physician-prescribed medications. Add in deaths from physician-performed surgeries without anesthesia or antisepsis. The numbers start looking catastrophic. Some historians argue medieval medicine was neutral. It didn't help, but didn't really hurt. Others argue it was actively harmful, a drag on population survival. The evidence suggests the latter. Regions with fewer physicians had better survival rates. Periods when physicians were unavailable due to plague or war saw population stabilization. The medical profession was paradoxically killing people, not through malice, through confidence, through certainty, through a complete inability to question their fundamental assumptions. You're leaving the physician's chamber now, weaker, poisoned, but still alive. For now. The physician is already preparing for his next patient, sharpening his lancets, mixing his toxins, confident in his knowledge, certain of his methods, wrong about everything. And somewhere, in another town, another physician is doing the same. In another, a whole profession dedicated to helping, achieving the opposite, century after century, generation after generation, teaching the next wave of doctors, passing down lethal wisdom as sacred truth. How did anyone survive? You're standing outside a Roman bathhouse. Except you're not in Rome. You're in medieval Europe. The year is 1100. And this bathhouse is about to close forever. Not because of economics. Not because of war. But because the church has decided that bathing is sinful. For centuries, Europeans inherited the Roman love of baths. Public bathhouses dotted every city. People bathed regularly, some daily. It was social, relaxing, hygienic. The Romans understood that clean bodies meant healthier populations. They didn't know about bacteria, but they knew that bathing helped prevent disease. Medieval Europeans knew this too, until they decided they didn't. The shift happened gradually. Church authorities began associating bathhouses with sin, with vanity, with lust, because people bathed naked, with worldly pleasure, which distracted from spiritual devotion. Ascetic monks preached that bodily filth was a sign of godliness. Saint Agnes supposedly never bathed and was praised for her holiness. Saint Francis considered dirt a badge of humility. The dirtier you were, the closer to God. Clean skin was suspicious. If you cared about your body, maybe you didn't care enough about your soul. So people stopped bathing. Not all at once. Not everywhere simultaneously. But over the course of a century or two, bathing went from common to rare to almost non-existent. By 1500, most Europeans bathed maybe once or twice a year. Some went years without water touching their skin. Queen Isabella of Castile famously boasted she'd only bathed twice in her life, at birth and before her wedding. This was presented as virtue, as proof of her spiritual purity. You're in a medieval bedroom now. The smell hits you first. Unwashed bodies, unwashed clothes, unwashed bedding. The occupants don't notice. They've lived with these smells their entire lives. It's normal to them. The woman of the house is getting dressed. She puts on a linen shift. She's worn it for 3 months without washing it. She'll wear it for 3 more. Over that goes a wool dress, also unwashed. Her hair is covered with a cloth. Beneath it, her scalp is crawling with lice. Everyone has lice. It's just part of life. Her husband is no cleaner. Their children play in the corner. Dirt caked under their fingernails. Faces streaked with grime. This family is not unusual. They're not peasants living in poverty. They're merchants, relatively wealthy. They could afford to bathe. They choose not to, because bathing is what vain, sinful people do. Godly people embrace their filth. Here's where it becomes deadly. Human skin is covered in bacteria, most of it harmless, some of it beneficial. But when you never wash, harmful bacteria multiply. Streptococcus, staphylococcus, various fungal infections. These accumulate in skin folds, in armpits and groins, under breasts, between toes. Anywhere sweat and dirt can collect. Small cuts become infected easily. Scratches turn into abscesses. Minor wounds develop into sepsis. The mortality rate from simple infections skyrocketed. But it wasn't just skin infections. Not bathing meant not washing hands. Medieval people ate with their hands, prepared food with their hands, never washed their hands. After using the privy, after handling raw meat, after touching sick people, after handling corpses, their hands were vectors for every disease imaginable. Typhoid, dysentery, cholera when it came, E. coli infections, parasitic worms, all transmitted through fecal-oral routes, all preventable with basic hand washing, which nobody did, because water was considered dangerous. Medieval physicians taught that water opened the pores, that diseases could enter through open pores, that bathing made you vulnerable to illness. So people avoided water entirely. They used dry, cleaning methods, rubbing the skin with cloths, applying perfumes to mask odors, changing linen undergarments occasionally, though occasionally might mean monthly. The wealthy had it worse in some ways. They wore layers of clothing, heavy fabrics that couldn't be washed easily, furs and velvets that trapped sweat and bacteria. Their elaborate outfits were breeding grounds for parasites. Fleas lived in the layers of clothing. Lice thrived in the complex hairstyles and wigs. Body lice spread typhus. Typhus killed millions during the medieval period, more than the plague in some regions. All because people wore unwashed clothes and never bathed. Academic historians debate whether the rejection of bathing was primarily religious or practical. Some argue that after the Black Death, people associated bathhouses with disease, because bathhouses brought people together, and disease spread in crowds. Others argue it was mostly theological, a rejection of Roman decadence, an embrace of Christian asceticism. Probably both factors reinforced each other. The result was the same. Europe became spectacularly filthy, and disease flourished. You're walking through a medieval city now. The streets are narrow. Waste flows in open gutters. Chamber pots are emptied from windows. The smell is overwhelming. Everyone you pass is caked in layers of grime. Their clothes are stiff with dried sweat. Their hair is matted. Open sores visible on hands and faces. Nobody seems bothered. This is just how life is. How it's supposed to be. Inside a wealthy home, a baby is being born. The midwife has just come from burying a plague victim. She hasn't washed her hands. Why would she? Water is dangerous. She examines the mother with filthy hands, introduces bacteria into the birth canal. Childbed fever will kill the mother in 3 days. The baby will die a week later, not from any inherent complication, but from preventable infection. This pattern repeated millions of times. Across centuries, women dying in childbirth from infections, babies dying from simple bacterial exposure, all because nobody washed their hands. The population couldn't sustain itself. Deaths exceeded births in many regions, not from plague, not from famine, but from the cumulative effect of filth. Some communities did figure it out. Jewish communities maintained ritual washing practices. They bathed regularly as religious requirement, washed hands before meals, cleaned their homes thoroughly. Their mortality rates were significantly lower, which led to them being accused of witchcraft, of somehow causing the diseases they weren't getting. Pogroms wiped out communities that had discovered the secret to survival because they were too healthy, too clean, too different. The rejection of bathing lasted for centuries. It wasn't until the 1700s that Europeans slowly began washing again. By then, the population had been devastated repeatedly. Whole generations lost to preventable diseases. Genetic bottlenecks created. Human diversity reduced. All because someone decided that God preferred dirty people. And everyone believed it. You're back in that bedroom. The merchant family is settling in for the night. They blow out the candle, lie down in their unwashed bedding, wearing their unwashed clothes, their unwashed bodies pressed together for warmth, sharing their bacteria, their lice, their fleas, their parasites. Outside, the city sleeps, filthy, diseased, dying slowly, one infection at a time, one unwashed hand, one avoided bath, one rejection of a knowledge that could save them. The Romans knew better. Medieval Europeans forgot and paid the price for centuries. In bodies buried, in children lost, in a civilization that came so close to drowning in its own filth that almost never climbed back out. You're standing in a scriptorium, a monastery workshop where manuscripts are copied. The year is 1320. Around you, monks sit at wooden desks, bent over parchment, quills moving slowly, copying sacred texts, illuminating margins with elaborate designs, creating works of art that will last centuries. It's quiet here, peaceful, holy work performed in silence. But something else is happening in this room, something the monks don't understand. They're poisoning themselves, slowly, carefully, with every brushstroke. Look at the pigments they're using. Brilliant reds made from cinnabar. That's mercury sulfide. Toxic, bright whites from lead carbonate. Deadly if inhaled or absorbed. Vivid greens from verdigris or arsenic compounds. Stunning blues from lapis lazuli. Relatively safe, actually, but expensive, so they use it sparingly. Yellows from orpiment. That's arsenic sulfide. They grind these pigments by hand. Breathe the dust as they work. Lick their brushes to make fine points. A common practice. Efficient. Fatal. Brother Thomas is working on a red initial letter. He's been a scribe for 15 years. His hands shake now. He can't quite control the tremor. His teeth are loose. His gums bleed when he eats. He has headaches that last for days. Confusion. Memory problems. He's 32 years old. He'll be dead by 35. Mercury poisoning. From the red ink, he's used thousands of times. The symptoms came on gradually. So gradually that no one connected them to the work. Brother Thomas thinks God is testing him, that his failing health is a spiritual trial. He prays more, works harder, uses more red ink, makes the poisoning worse. Across the room, Brother William is younger, only been copying manuscripts for 5 years, but he specializes in white highlights, uses lead white constantly. He's developing abdominal pain, constipation, fatigue that never lifts no matter how much he sleeps. His thoughts feel foggy. He forgets words mid-sentence. Lead poisoning affects the brain. Personality changes. Irritability. Depression. Brother William used to be cheerful. Now he's withdrawn. The other monks think he's becoming more contemplative, more spiritual. They don't realize he's dying. The abbot is proud of his scriptorium. Dozens of manuscripts completed each year. The monastery's reputation for beautiful illumination is known across Europe. Wealthy patrons commission prayer books. Nobles request family Bibles. The work is endless, and the monks are dedicated. They see their suffering as sacrifice, as offering their bodies to God's work. They don't know they're being poisoned by the very pigments that make their manuscripts beautiful. Academic historians have analyzed medieval manuscripts, found toxic levels of heavy metals on the pages. Mercury, lead, arsenic. Enough to be dangerous even to modern researchers handling them. Imagine what it did to the people creating them. Grinding the pigments, mixing them with binding media, applying them day after day, year after year. Some monasteries lost entire generations of scribes. Young men entering the scriptorium healthy, dead within a decade. The mortality rate was noticed, but misinterpreted. Scribes were thought to be especially holy. God called them home earlier because they were needed in heaven. Their deaths were seen as blessing, not industrial poisoning. Here's where it becomes an extinction threat. Monasteries were the knowledge centers of medieval Europe. They preserved classical texts, recorded history, maintained medical knowledge, flawed as it was, copied religious and philosophical works. The scribes were irreplaceable. Training a scribe took years. Learning to read and write Latin, mastering calligraphy, understanding color theory and pigment preparation, developing the steady hand and patience required. When a scribe died, that knowledge died with him. Yes, he trained others, but the most experienced scribes, the masters, were dying in their 30s. Before they could pass on decades of accumulated skill, the quality of manuscripts began to decline, not dramatically, but noticeably. Later medieval manuscripts show more errors, less elaborate illumination, simpler designs, not because standards dropped, but because the masters kept dying, and the apprentices were being poisoned before they could become masters. Some knowledge was lost entirely. Specialized techniques, particular pigment recipes, methods of achieving certain effects. The scribes who knew them died. The secrets died with them. Remember, this was before printing presses. Every book had to be copied by hand. Every medical text, every philosophical treatise, every historical chronicle, every religious document. If the scribes died out, knowledge stopped spreading, stopped being preserved. Humanity's collective memory started developing gaps. You're walking between the desks now. Brother Thomas's hand is shaking so badly he's smeared the red ink. He's frustrated with himself, doesn't understand why his body won't obey anymore. Brother William has stopped working. His head is down on the desk. The other monks assume he's praying. He's actually losing consciousness. Lead poisoning has progressed to encephalopathy. His brain is swelling. He'll have a seizure tonight, die within the week. In the corner, a young novice is learning to grind pigments. The master scribe is teaching him. Grind it fine, he says. The finer the better. The novice grinds. Dust rises. Gets in his nose, his mouth, his lungs. He's 13 years old. He'll start showing symptoms by 18. Be dead by 25. But right now, he's excited, honored to learn this sacred craft, to contribute to God's work. He has no idea he's grinding his own poison. The monasteries weren't ignorant of all toxins. They knew some substances were dangerous. Arsenic was known to be poisonous. Mercury had a reputation for causing madness. Lead was suspected of causing health problems. But the connection between pigments and illness wasn't made. The pigments were transformed, mixed with eggs or gum arabic, applied to parchment. Surely they became safe through this process. Surely God wouldn't let holy work cause harm. So the scribes continued, generation after generation, creating beauty, creating knowledge, creating their own slow deaths. Some monasteries experimented with less toxic pigments, used more of the expensive lapis lazuli, relied on organic dyes instead of mineral pigments. These monasteries had lower mortality rates among scribes, but they didn't understand why. They just knew their scribes lived longer. Thought perhaps those monasteries were particularly blessed. The poisoned manuscripts spread the damage beyond the scriptoriums. Wealthy collectors acquired illuminated prayer books, handled them daily, kissed pages depicting saints, absorbed toxins through their lips and skin, developed mysterious illnesses, blamed curses or witchcraft, never suspected their beautiful prayer books. Children were given illustrated primers, touched the colorful images, put their hands in their mouths, ingested lead and mercury, developed learning difficulties and behavioral problems, all from books meant to educate them. The irony is profound. Monasteries dedicated to preserving life and knowledge, accidentally destroying both, creating objects of beauty that carried death, teaching wisdom while spreading poison. You're leaving the scriptorium now. Behind you, the monks continue working, heads bent, quills scratching, pigments gleaming in the candlelight, red and white and green and gold. Beautiful, deadly. Each manuscript a masterpiece. Each masterpiece bought with years of scribe's life. Brother Thomas will finish his page. Brother William will be carried to the infirmary. The novice will keep grinding. The abbot will commission another project. And the cycle continues. Beauty and death, knowledge and poison, devotion and extinction. One carefully illuminated page at a time. You're in a birthing chamber. The year is 1380. A woman named Margaret is in labor. She's 23 years old. This is her fourth pregnancy. Her first child died at birth. Her second lived 3 days. Her third survived, a boy, now 5 years old. Margaret knows the odds. She's made her peace with God, written a will, said goodbye to her family, just in case. Because childbirth is a gamble, and a house always wins eventually. The room is crowded. Her mother is here, her sister, 3 neighbor women who serve as midwives, a priest waiting in the hallway, just in case. The windows are sealed shut. Medieval wisdom says fresh air is dangerous during labor, that evil spirits can enter through open windows. So the room is stifling. Hot, airless, perfect conditions for bacteria to thrive. Margaret has been in labor for 18 hours. The midwives are getting worried. One of them suggests a traditional remedy. She produces a small pouch. Inside is a piece of parchment. Written on it are prayers and the names of saints. She ties the pouch around Margaret's thigh. This will ease the birth, she says. It won't, but it's what they know to do. Another midwife prepares a tonic. Ground herbs mixed with wine. The recipe has been passed down for generations. One of the herbs is ergot. Remember that contaminated grain? It causes contractions. Strong, violent contractions. Too strong. The kind that can rupture the uterus, or exhaust the mother, or kill the baby through lack of oxygen. Margaret drinks it, because they tell her to, because they're the experts, because what choice does she have? The contractions intensify, become agonizing. Margaret screams. The women hold her down. This is normal, they tell her. This is what childbirth is. God's punishment for Eve's sin. You're supposed to suffer. Hours pass. The baby isn't coming. One of the midwives decides to examine Margaret internally. Her hands are unwashed. She's just come from laying out a corpse this morning. Never washed her hands after. Why would she? Water is dangerous. She reaches inside, trying to turn the baby. Her filthy hands introduce bacteria into the birth canal, into the uterus. Streptococcus, staphylococcus, the bacteria that cause childbed fever. Puerperal sepsis. Margaret doesn't know this yet. Right now, she's just trying to survive the labor. The baby finally comes. A girl. She's alive, breathing. The women rejoice. Margaret is exhausted, but alive. She survived another birth. For now, the afterbirth comes. One of the midwives examines it, declares it complete. It's not. Small fragments remain inside Margaret's uterus. They'll start to rot, provide more food for the bacteria already introduced. But nobody knows this. Margaret is cleaned up, given ale to drink, told to rest. The women leave. The priest is dismissed. Margaret's husband enters. Relieved, they have a daughter. Margaret is alive. Everything seems fine, except it's not. The next day, Margaret develops a fever. By the evening, she's burning up. Her abdomen is tender. The pain is increasing. Childbed fever has begun. The midwives are called back. They're not surprised. Childbed fever is common. 1 in 3 women who give birth develop it. Many die. It's just the way things are. The midwives try their remedies. Poultices applied to the abdomen. More herbal tonics. Prayers and relics. Nothing works. Because nothing can work. Margaret has a bacterial infection. She needs antibiotics, which won't be invented for another 550 years. By the third day, Margaret is delirious. By the fourth, she's dying. By the fifth, she's dead. Her daughter will be nursed by a wet nurse, who also has childbed fever from her own recent birth. The baby will die within the month. Margaret's 5-year-old son is now an orphan. His grandmother will raise him. She lost 3 daughters to childbirth. This is just how life is. Academic historians estimate maternal mortality rates in medieval Europe at 1 to 2% per birth. That sounds low, until you realize women had 6 to 8 pregnancies on average. Suddenly the lifetime risk is 6 to 16%, and that's conservative. Some estimates go as high as 30% lifetime risk. 1 in 3 women dying from pregnancy-related causes. Now add infant mortality. About 30 to 40% of babies died before age 5. Half of those in the first year. For a population to remain stable, you need roughly 2 surviving children per woman. When 1/3 of women die in childbirth, and 1/3 of babies don't survive, the math becomes terrifying. You need a lot of pregnancies to maintain population, which means more chances for maternal death, which means fewer women surviving to raise children, which means more orphans, which means lower survival rates overall. It's a death spiral, and medieval Europe was caught in it. Some regions experienced negative population growth for decades. More deaths than births. Villages shrinking. Towns emptying. Not from plague or famine, just from the steady grind of childbirth mortality. The worst part? Most of it was preventable. Childbed fever is caused by bacterial infection. It's prevented by washing hands, sterilizing instruments, keeping the birthing environment clean. Medieval people did none of these things. Actively avoided them, in fact. Water was considered dangerous. Fresh air was considered dangerous. Cleanliness was associated with vanity. So women gave birth in sealed, filthy rooms, attended by people with unwashed hands, using contaminated instruments, creating perfect conditions for deadly infections. Ignaz Semmelweis figured this out in 1847. He discovered that doctors who washed their hands with chlorinated lime solution had much lower rates of childbed fever in their patients. The medical establishment rejected his findings, mocked him, drove him insane. He died in an asylum. But he was right. And if medieval people had understood this, if they just washed their hands, millions of women would have lived. Millions of babies would have survived. The population would have stabilized, grown, thrived. Instead, they died. 1 birth chamber at a time. 1 unwashed hand. 1 sealed window. 1 contaminated instrument. You're standing in Margaret's house now, 3 days after her death. Her body has been prepared for burial. Her daughter lies in a cradle, being nursed by the wet nurse. The baby is already developing a fever. Margaret's son sits in the corner, silent. He doesn't fully understand, just knows his mother isn't coming back. In 9 months, there will be another birth in this village. Another woman will labor. Another midwife will attend with unwashed hands. Another family will wait to see if mother and baby survive. The odds haven't changed, won't change for centuries. Childbirth remains the most dangerous thing a woman can do. More dangerous than plague. More dangerous than famine. More dangerous than war. Because it happens to everyone. Rich or poor. Noble or peasant. Queen or beggar. All equally vulnerable. All gambling with the same loaded dice. Margaret's grave will have a simple stone. Her name, her age, died in childbed. The most common epitaph for women in medieval cemeteries. So common it's almost unremarkable. Just another death. Just another woman. Just another family torn apart. Just another step closer to extinction. When creating life ends life. When the most natural process becomes the most dangerous. Humanity's survival hangs by a thread. And medieval Europe was pulling that thread. Tighter and tighter. Birth by birth. Death by death. Until the thread was almost ready to snap. You're standing at the center of a village. The year is 1425. In front of you is the well. Stone walls rising about 4 feet high. A wooden roof to keep rain out. A bucket on a rope. This well serves the entire village. 200 people draw their water from here. For drinking, for cooking, for washing, when they bother to wash. Everyone gathers here. It's a social space. Women collect water and exchange gossip. Children play around the edges. Men stop by after working the fields. The well is the heart of village life. It's also killing them. Slowly, invisibly, efficiently. Look down into the well. The water looks clear, cool, safe. But if you could see what's actually in that water, you'd never drink it. Bacteria from human waste. Parasites from animal waste. Runoff from the tanning pits 100 yards away. Seepage from the graveyard on the hill. Dead animals that fell in and were never removed. This water is a bacterial soup, a disease incubator, a communal death sentence. And everyone drinks from it. The well is only 30 feet deep, dug into the water table. That same water table that runs beneath the village privies, beneath the animal pens, beneath the midden heaps where garbage rots. Medieval people understood wells needed to be near settlements, close enough that carrying water wasn't exhausting. But they didn't understand groundwater flow, didn't know that water moves through soil, carries contaminants with it, spreads disease in invisible currents. So they dug wells wherever was convenient, often directly downstream, in groundwater terms from their own waste. The village privy is 50 feet from the well, a simple pit in the ground, covered with a wooden seat. No lining, no protection. Waste seeps directly into the soil, filters down, reaches the water table, flows toward the well. Nobody sees this happening, so nobody knows. Maria is drawing water. She's done this twice a day for 20 years. She lowers the bucket, pulls it up. The water splashes into her ceramic jug. She drinks a handful straight from the bucket. Refreshing, cold, contaminated with fecal bacteria. In 3 days, she'll develop diarrhea, severe cramping, fever, dysentery. She'll be dead in a week. Her family will blame bad humors, or perhaps witchcraft. Never the well. The well that's been there for generations. The well that everyone uses. The well that's always been safe. Except it hasn't. Look at the village mortality records. Every summer, death spike. Children especially. Summer flux, they call it. Bloody flux. We call it dysentery, cholera, typhoid. Waterborne diseases that thrive in warm weather. That multiply in the well when temperatures rise. Every summer, a quarter of the children die. Every summer, the survivors develop some immunity. Every summer, new babies are born to replace the dead. It's just a cycle of life. Nobody questions it. The well itself is maintained poorly. The stones are crumbling in places. Gaps that let surface water run directly in. When it rains, the water level rises. Looks plentiful. Actually, it's diluting the bacterial concentration with rainwater runoff. Runoff that flows across the village square, past the animal pens, through the waste-strewn streets, carrying everything into the well. After heavy rains, illness always increases. The villagers have noticed this. Their explanation? Rain brings miasma, bad air that causes disease. So they seal their windows during rainstorms, stay inside in stuffy, crowded rooms, where disease spreads even faster. Never mind the contaminated well. That can't be the problem. Wells are sacred, life-giving, blessed by priests. How could blessed water make you sick? Academic historians studying medieval mortality records see clear patterns. Villages with wells near cemeteries had higher death rates. Villages with wells downstream from animal operations had worse outbreaks. Villages that switched well locations sometimes saw dramatic improvements. But the pattern wasn't understood at the time. Each village thought their problems were unique, specific to them. Punishment for sin, or bad luck, never systemic, never preventable. A wealthy merchant wants to improve the village. He pays to have the well cleaned. Men are lowered down on ropes. They scoop out accumulated sludge from the bottom. Find 3 dead rats, a dead cat, something that might have been a dog, decades of decomposing organic matter. They pull it all out, dump it in a field. The well water looks clearer now. For a few weeks, fewer people get sick. The merchant is praised. But then the mortality returns to normal. Because the fundamental problem hasn't been solved. The contamination sources remain. The groundwater flow continues. The well refills with the same water table it always drew from. Cleaning the well is like bailing a leaking boat. Temporarily helpful, ultimately futile. Some villages are smarter. They notice wells near rivers have fewer problems. They don't understand why. The river water is moving, filtering, diluting. But they notice the correlation. These villages survive better. Their populations grow. They prosper, not through understanding, through luck and observation. Most villages aren't that lucky. Most villages have their wells where they've always been. Tradition matters. The well is where grandfather dug it, and his grandfather before him. To move, it would be admitting the ancestors were wrong. Impossible. So people keep drinking, keep getting sick, keep dying. Generation after generation. You're watching the daily water collection. Dozens of people coming and going, each taking home a jug of contaminated water. Each family will use it for everything. Drinking, cooking, washing vegetables, mixing with wine, which helps. Actually, the alcohol kills some bacteria, but not enough. A mother is washing her infant's face with well water, gently wiping away dirt, introducing bacteria to the baby's eyes, nose, mouth. The baby will develop an eye infection, go blind in one eye. If the baby survives at all, two boys are splashing each other at the well's edge, playing, laughing, getting water in their mouths. One of them will be dead by harvest time. Summer flux. His parents will grieve, bury him in the graveyard on the hill, the same graveyard whose runoff feeds the well. The cycle continues. An old woman approaches. She's lived in this village for 70 years, drank from this well her entire life. She's developed immunity to some of the bacteria. Her gut is colonized with parasites, chronic diarrhea, malnutrition despite eating. The parasites steal her nutrients. She's thin, weak, but alive. She's one of the lucky ones. Most people don't make it to 70. The well has taken care of that. Here's why this threatens extinction. Every village has a well, or several wells, all of them contaminated to varying degrees, all of them causing disease, all of them killing people. The cumulative effect across Europe is staggering. Millions dying from waterborne illness. Not dramatic deaths, not memorable deaths, just steady attrition. Children who never reach adulthood. Adults who die in their 30s. Populations that can't grow. Communities that barely replace their dead. And nobody understands why. They see the symptoms, the suffering, the death. But they can't see the cause. Can't see the bacteria. Can't trace the contamination routes. Can't understand groundwater. So they pray. Make offerings. Blame witches. Blame Jews. Blame anyone but the well. The well that's killing them. The well that's always been there. The well that will always be there. Drawing from the same poison water table. Serving the same contaminated water. Maintaining the same death rate. Until finally, someone asks the right question. Sees the right pattern. Makes the right connection. But that won't happen for centuries yet. For now, the well stands. Stone and wood and rope. Innocent looking. Essential. Deadly. The heart of village life. And the instrument of village death. You're standing on a hilltop overlooking medieval Europe. The year is 1500. From here, you can see it all. Villages dotting the landscape. Smoke rising from chimneys. Fields being worked. Churches standing tall. Life continuing. Against all odds. Despite everything. Humanity survived. Not because they did things right, but because they were stubborn enough to keep going even when they did everything wrong. Look at what they endured. Eating poison grain that made them hallucinate and lose their limbs. Dancing themselves to death while physicians prescribed more dancing. Killing the cats that could have saved them from plague. Bleeding themselves weak in the name of healing. Abandoning bathing and embracing filth as virtue. Poisoning themselves with the very pigments they use to preserve knowledge. Dying in childbirth at rates that should have ended the species. Drinking from wells contaminated with their own waste. Each of these should have been catastrophic alone. Together, they should have been extinction. But here we are, still here. The medieval population was resilient in ways we can barely imagine. They buried their children and had more. They lost siblings to summer flux and kept working the fields. They watched their mothers die in childbirth and married anyway. They survived plagues that killed half their village and rebuilt. There was no therapy, no grief counseling, no social safety net, just the expectation that you'd keep going. Because what else could you do? The alternative was giving up. And humans don't give up. Not easily. Not permanently. Even when everything suggests we should. Think about the accumulated knowledge that survived. Not in books. Many of those were lost. Not in institutions. Those collapsed regularly. But in people. The farmer who knew when to plant. The midwife who knew which herbs eased pain without killing. The carpenter who understood wood and joinery. The blacksmith who could make tools. This knowledge passed through generations. Parent to child. Master to apprentice. Survivor to survivor. Even when 60% of the population died, the remaining 40% remembered enough. Taught the next generation. Rebuilt what was lost. Some villages were completely abandoned. Empty shells of buildings. Overgrown fields. Wells gone dry. But nearby survivors would eventually move in. Reclaim the buildings. Clear the fields. Restart life. Like a forest after fire. Destroyed but not dead. Dormant but not extinct. Waiting to regenerate. The really remarkable thing? Medieval people didn't know they were close to extinction. They thought life was supposed to be this hard. That suffering was normal. That death was God's will. They had no framework for understanding they were in crisis. No statistics showing population decline. No epidemiologists tracking mortality rates. No demographers calculating replacement rates. They just lived, suffered, died, and somehow kept the species going. There's something darkly beautiful about that resilience. About continuing despite not knowing if it matters. About building futures you might not live to see. About having children knowing they might not survive. About teaching skills to apprentices who might die before mastering them. Medieval people lived with uncertainty we can't imagine, not knowing if tomorrow would bring disease, or famine, or war, or just another hard day of work that barely kept you alive. And they kept going anyway. Academic historians still debate how close Europe came to actual extinction. Some argue the population was never truly threatened. That even at the worst points, enough people survived to recover. Others suggest we came within a hair's breadth. That a few more plagues, a few more famines, a few more systematic mistakes, and humanity's European branch might have ended. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Extinction wasn't inevitable, but it was possible, closer than comfortable, closer than anyone at the time realized. What saved us? Partially it was luck. The plagues eventually burned out. The famines eventually ended. The climate eventually improved. But more than luck, it was adaptability. Even without understanding germ theory, some people noticed patterns. Wells near rivers were safer. Use those. Villages with cats had fewer rats. Keep the cats. Patients who weren't bled seemed to survive better. Maybe ease up on the bloodletting. Slowly, grudgingly, over centuries. Knowledge accumulated, not through science, through trial and error, through survival of the practices that worked, and elimination of the ones that didn't. Evolution, essentially, but for cultural practices. The ideas that killed everyone who believed them died out with their believers. The ideas that kept people alive spread. Not because anyone understood why, just because the survivors kept doing what the survivors did. You're walking down from the hilltop now, into a village. It's evening. People are finishing their day's work. Children are playing. Smoke rises from cooking fires. It looks peaceful, almost idyllic. You know better now. You know about the contaminated well they'll drink from tomorrow. The unwashed hands that will prepare tonight's meal. The pregnant woman who has a 15% chance of dying within a year. The scribe in the monastery slowly poisoning himself with red ink. The grain stores developing ergot in the damp cellar. The physicians who will make their patients worse. The cats being killed to please God. The children who won't live to adulthood. But you also know they'll survive. Not all of them. Not even most of them. But enough. Always just enough. To keep the thread unbroken. To pass the torch forward. To ensure that we're here now, tonight, together. thinking about them, learning from them, grateful we don't have to make their choices, face their odds, survive their world. Medieval people almost ended humanity through ignorance, but they saved humanity through persistence. They didn't know enough to survive, but they were too stubborn to die, and that made all the difference. The night is settling over the village now. Candles being lit, shutters closing, families gathering. Another day survived, another night to rest, another morning to face. The same as yesterday, the same as tomorrow. The endless rhythm of medieval life. Hard, short, brutal, but continuing, always continuing. And from that continuation, we emerged. From those survivors, we descended, carrying their stubbornness, their resilience, their refusal to give up, even when giving up seemed reasonable. We are here because they kept going, even when they didn't know where they were going, even when the path was dark, even when the odds were terrible. They kept going, and so we continue, their improbable descendants, carrying forward the same human spirit, the same refusal to quit, the same stubborn insistence that tomorrow might be better, even when today suggests otherwise. That's the legacy of medieval survival. Not wisdom, not understanding, not careful planning, just determination. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's always been enough. To simply refuse to be the generation that ends it. To keep going, keep trying, keep hoping, despite everything, because of everything, for everyone who comes after, the way they did, for us. And so we've walked together through 10 ways medieval people nearly ended their own story. Through contaminated grain and dancing plagues. Through missing cats and confident physicians. Through abandoned baths and poisoned pigments. Through deadly births and contaminated wells. Through choices that made sense at the time but led toward darkness. You've witnessed the fragility of human survival. How close we came to not being here. How many times the thread almost snapped, but it didn't, because of people who kept going even when going seemed impossible. Who planted fields they might not harvest. Who taught children who might not survive. Who built futures they couldn't guarantee. Who loved and hoped and tried despite everything suggesting they shouldn't bother. Tonight, as you lie in your bed, clean sheets, climate-controlled room, antibiotics in the medicine cabinet if you need them, you're the beneficiary of their stubbornness, their refusal to be the last generation, their determination to pass something forward even when they didn't know what came next. We carry their resilience in our bones, their persistence in our blood, their hope in our hearts, not because they were wise, not because they understood, but because they simply wouldn't quit. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Not the specific mistakes they made, though those are worth remembering. Not the specific dangers they faced, though those put our own troubles in perspective. But the fundamental human quality they demonstrated. The ability to keep going, to face another morning, to try again, even when yesterday was brutal and tomorrow looks worse. They did that for us. Every single one of them who survived just long enough to have children, to pass on knowledge, to keep the flame burning through the darkness. And now it's our turn to honor that gift by living fully, by facing our own challenges with their same stubborn grace, by refusing to be the generation that gives up. Whatever you're facing in your own life right now, and we all face things, remember them. Remember the medieval mother who buried 3 children and still found the courage to have a 4th. Remember the scribe who copied manuscripts even as his hands shook from poison, because knowledge mattered more than his life. Remember the villagers who rebuilt after plague took half their neighbors, because someone had to plant the spring wheat. Remember the unnamed millions who simply got up each day and did what needed doing without knowing if it would matter, without seeing the distant future where we'd remember their sacrifice. They couldn't see us, but we can see them. And in seeing them, we understand that survival isn't about avoiding all danger, isn't about making perfect choices, isn't about understanding everything. It's about continuing, about showing up, about doing the next thing, and then the next, and then the next, until one day, impossibly, centuries have passed and life has found a way. So rest now. Let the weight of the day fall away. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Let your muscles relax into the safety of this moment. You're not fighting for survival against medieval odds tonight. You are not drinking from contaminated wells or eating poisoned grain. You're not dancing until your heart gives out or being bled by confident physicians. You're simply here, safe, warm, resting, and that is enough. That has always been enough. The medieval peasant who collapsed in a bed after 16 hours of labor, exhausted but alive. The monk who finished his page and put down his poisoned quill, one more day survived. The mother who saw her children sleep safely, one more night granted. They would understand this moment, this simple act of resting, of letting go, of trusting that tomorrow will come and you'll face it when it does. But for now, there's only this, the soft darkness, the quiet room, the gentle rhythm of your breathing. Nothing to solve, nothing to fix, nothing to survive. Just rest. Deep, peaceful, well-earned rest. You are the descendants of survivors. You carry their strength. And tonight, that strength allows you to simply let go. Sweet dreams.